waiting for the way to wake me up from waiting. Do I mean it when I'm praying just to pray to see you move the mountain somehow? I don't want another way to move among the mirrors I'm protecting. And I'm never really claiming all the grace it takes to make a way with you out. I'm giving in. I'm giving in. Standing in the river of my second guesses. Don't believe it when I'm praying, too afraid to pray and stir the water somehow. Never really been okay to move among the whispers, never resting. Is there any other way to make the space it takes to break away with you now? I'm giving in. I'm giving in.
Testing, testing. All right, if you are out in the lobby, we want you to come on in. We're going to be getting started. You're not going to want to miss this morning. Come on in. There it is. Does anyone want to push people through into the odd? Hey, Chandler. We're going to be starting. Everyone, come on in. All right. Good morning. Good to be back with you all. We have a guest speaker this morning, which I'm super excited to introduce. I am going to wait momentarily as people make their way in here. How many of you went home and actually went straight to bed last night? Anyone? Fair amount of you. How many of you were like, this is San Antonio, I don't know when I'm back, and you went and did something? All right. A few of you. All right. Well, we're going to be done earlier today, so hopefully you'll have more evening space to be able to engage and go forward. All right. This is from chapter 1 of one of our speaker's books. He said, I never imagined I'd be at this crossroads. I never pictured myself at the ripe age of 19, already facing the biggest question of my life. I enrolled in college with one goal, to be a third grade teacher. My plans were simple. Not only would I teach, but I would marry a teacher. We would never work a holiday. I would have my summers free to golf, and eventually we'd retire in a beautiful Winnebago. I had my life laid out and was excited about the path it was on. I was a believer, but for some reason, I just left God out of the big decision and relegated him to the Sunday morning department. My assumption was that I would happily join the ranks of countless Christians who aspire to the American dream, never questioning my course, but seeking only for God to bless it. Then my freshman year in college, something happened. I met a guy who had purpose. He used a completely different grid to make decisions. He invited me to be in a Bible study where we prayed for the world. This was weird. I'm thinking, why not pray more about me? We met internationals on campus. We shared our faith, and we invited others to join us. He showed me passages in the Bible that revealed God's desire to see the nations reached. They were everywhere. And my world started to turn upside down. And I am so thankful that this man's world turned upside down. He ended up going on to found the traveling team that travels across the country, reaching college students and mobilizing them for God's kingdom and missions all over the world. Many of you in the room have probably heard of the traveling team or been impacted by his ministry over the last 20 years. I actually met Todd 20 years ago when I was a college student, a junior at the University of New Hampshire. At that time, I had long hair, and he had short hair. We have reversed that. He now has the flow. It's awesome. And then God brought us together this summer. We go to a family camp, Gull Lake Ministries, and I get there. I had no idea who the speaker was going to be. I was just trying to get my kids there and my family. You know how that is. And we sit down, and I look, and I'm like, I know this guy. And then it dawned on me. I was like, this is Todd. And I told my wife, I was like, I met him 20 years ago. And then got to hear him speak. He has just as much passion as he did 20 years ago, which was super encouraging that he sees college students in campus ministry as the most mobilizable people group, especially in North America, and has been focused on that for 20 years, mobilizing people for the kingdom of God. The thing that stood out to me, I remember lots of speakers came and go. I think he came to an InterVarsity event or a campus crusade. I don't remember which one at UNH. And he was there with his wife and one other couple, and they were in this tiny little room. There's maybe 20 of us, and he was speaking like he was in a convention. The energy he brings is infectious. It's awesome. And as he shared, he was talking about how he got a highlighter, and he started going through the Bible and just highlighting where God's heart is for the world. Anything that touched the world, he highlighted. And he said, I didn't even get out of the Pentateuch, and I had to get another highlighter. And he ended up going through, I don't even know, dozens of highlighters as he went through the entire Bible. And that fueled his passion to actually mobilize people for God's kingdom, for the world. This summer it reignited me, and as I thought about this conference in Haggai and the idea that Haggai's message came and it sparked the enthusiasm of the people, I thought, God, we need to be sparked. And not just for our churches and our ministry, but for what God wants to do in the whole world. Because as we minister college students, we have an opportunity to even see people mobilized beyond our movement, beyond our churches, to kingdom works, not only in this country, but all over the world. Pioneers, the mission agency, has said that 40% of all candidates come through the traveling team. That's insane. And that's common among mission agencies to this day. They're that effective. He has traveled for 20 years. He's spoken at thousands of campuses here and all over the world. He has engaged over 1 million students. Please welcome Todd Ahrens.
My parents are hitting the age where they get really old, and so I feel bad. The days of screening their phone calls is over, okay? I know you might still be in that world, but my world has changed, and I don't screen my dad's calls anymore. I go visit him more, and I just sort of realized, I'm like, man, I need to talk to him more. So I went on a trip to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I was born and raised. And I go see my parents, and I'm in the living room, and I'm having coffee with my dad. And can we turn the lights up a little bit? I just want to see who I'm talking. Is that possible? Can we make it? Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm in the living room with my mom and dad, and we're having coffee, and they're drinking cranberry juice. And I say, Dad, how did we wind up here? How did I wind up here in Tulsa? And he's like, he says, oh man, I'd never asked him that question. And he gets up from the chair, and he walks over to the front door, and he pulls a picture frame off the wall. Now, I'd passed this frame. It's been hanging on the wall for 45 years, okay? This is not a new thing. And he pulls it off the wall, and he's like, Todd, you've passed this frame 1,000 times. He's like, this is our farm cell. He's like, I was raised in Sassauca, Oklahoma, and we lived off 12 Black Angus and raising peanuts. And in April, a storm came, and all the Black Angus gathered under a tree, lightning struck and killed all 12. Then in November, a freeze happened, and it killed all the peanuts. He said, my family had to sell the farm. In 1948, Jim Aaron, he literally itemized the farm list, and he had to sell the farm, and we moved to the city. And he said, man, tragedy for my family, but it provided growth for me, because now we moved to the city. I was able to go to school, get an education, get a master's, and become a principal. And that phrase just stood out. Tragedy for the family, but growth for me. And we're gonna look this morning at the first 300 years of how we got here. And then tonight, we're gonna look at the last 300 years. And we're going to see just how we got here. And you're going to find out real fast that tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. You're going to find out real fast that tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. I mean, for me, as Jay mentioned in the introduction, I didn't come to college a reader. I didn't come to college like looking for Christ. But something happened in college where I had a radical transformation. And I think before college, my freshman year in college, I read my first book, Catcher in the Rye, got through half of it, okay? Didn't make it all the way, tried, sorry, it's a classic, didn't care. So for me, reading biographies, like, no thanks. But here's what happened my freshman year. I realized the only thing that's gonna make me different 5 years from now are the friends I have and the books I read. And I needed better voices in my life. I needed better voices. And so what did I do? I went to the voices of the past. I'm like, man, if I'm gonna reach the present, I should look to the past. See how they did it. See how I wound up here. And so I began to read biographies, the history of missions, the history of students in missions. And man, let me tell you, something happened. First of all, I realized I was standing on the shoulders of giants. Like Jay said last night, the shade we sit in are because of the trees others planted. Second of all, I looked at my campus and I'm like, man, if God could do this with the Roman Empire, he can do this at Northeastern State. Like, if he can do this with the Roman Empire in severe persecution, surely he can do it with 70 college students who are Christ followers who want to make a difference. And man, the power of the gospel in my life just elevated. I'm like, oh my goodness, my expectations elevated. And specifically what you're gonna see tonight, I realized all the obstacles that I had, parents, debt, finances, the call, materialism, apathy, indifference, that was all they had too. Nothing's new. That was their obstacles too. And so we're gonna look at the first 300 years. Like, how in the world, how am I a Christ follower? Like, that's just unbelievable. Like, think about this. I'm a white, wealthy Westerner who lives in 2022. I'm 2,000 years removed from when the founder of Christianity was crucified, who spoke a language that I don't speak, who live in a land that I've never visited, but yet I follow him. That's a little odd. That's a little odd. It happened 2,000 years ago in a language I don't speak, in a land I've never visited, but I've given my life to this. How? What am I doing? My parents think I'm crazy, and they're right. Like, do you even speak? Christianity is the only world religion that doesn't speak the language of its founder, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. How did we get here? How did I get here? That's what we want to look at. And man, this is a powerful passage. Galatians 4:4. At the right time, God sent his son. Like, if I'm God, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait till 1982 when there's something called commercials, and we'll just send God then. We'll send Christ then, okay? That way they can, like, in the middle of the Super Bowl, we can, like, play an ad for the Messiah. It'd be great. Or, oh, man, I'm going to wait till 1991 when they have something called the iPhone, and now all of a sudden it's like we can do selfies with Jesus. Like, instead, he decides Jesus will start his ministry in 30 AD in the backwoods town of Galilee, specifically even a smaller backwood town, Nazareth. Why? Why would God send his son to a time of the Roman Empire when Rome ruled the world? And it's real easy. It's real easy. The red represents the Roman Empire. The white in the middle is the Mediterranean Sea. I want you to sear this in your soul, okay? I want you to sear this in your soul. And right there is where Jesus started. Why? Well, there were probably a few reasons. First of all, Roman roads. Hundreds of thousands of roads. The one thing Rome gave the world, and probably the only thing, was concrete. They invented concrete. That's it. Rome invented concrete. And guess what they gave us? Roads. Hundreds of thousands of roads. So when Jesus looked at the 11 disciples and said, go ye, they literally saw a road that led to Egypt. A road that led to Italy. A road that led to Asia. Roads. The citizenship The citizenship, you could travel freely if you were a Roman citizen, and it provided a level of protection. So when Christ's followers if they were citizens of Rome, they had a certain level of protection. Roads, citizenship, the language, common language of Greek. Oh my gosh. Roads, citizenship, language, peace, the peace of Rome, Pax Romani, the peace of Rome. And so when you look at it, you're like, wow, this is actually pretty smart to send the Messiah here. Galatians 4, when God set the time, he decided it fully come, he sent his son. You could travel the Roman Empire over the course of a summer. Over the course of a summer. Paul never left the Roman Empire. Okay, all of his mission trips were inside. Why? Peace, protection, roads, citizenship. When Jesus stood in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, and looks at the 11 and says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and I'm with you always, even to the ends of the age. And that fell on the apostles. What did they do with it? Where did they go? What happened after he rose from the dead and returned to the Father? Where did they go? Oh, they went. They went. They went. Look at this. I want to show you something interesting. The first person to leave the Roman Empire with the gospel and to go to India was Thomas. We have more archaeological evidence on Thomas than any other apostle. In 54 AD, he takes the trade routes and he goes to India. And he lands in India and he begins to share the gospel. He lands in southern India. He begins to share the gospel. He eventually starts a church. He leads people to Christ, and then 4 Hindu priests spear him to death. He founded, today you can go there. It's called the St. Thomas Church. It was established in 52 AD by Thomas. It's the oldest church in India. It's the oldest church in India. It's one of 7 founded. Think about this. John 20, it says this. John 20, 28, it says this. My Lord, my God. That was said of by Thomas. Thomas gives us the highest Christological things said of Christ in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Thomas says, my Lord and my God. Jesus never rebukes them. Then he's the only one who takes the gospel like all the way east to India, and he starts a church. How is it that today when you ask anybody about Thomas, they call him Doubting Thomas? He should be believing Thomas. Oh my gosh, are you joking? We got to change the scenario here. I mean, highest Christological thinking that he ever gave. He goes all the way to India. And when you look at this, you're like, wow, tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. Peter crucified. Andrew crucified. Philip crucified. Bartholomew crucified. Thaddeus crucified. Simon crucified. James killed with the sword. The other James stoned to death. Thomas thrust with a spear, then burned. Matthew beheaded. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. There were 70 emperors of Rome, of the Roman Empire. Most were murdered or died of suicide. What I want to share with you is the 3 that matters most to us on how I got here. How did I get here as a Christ follower in 2022? There's 3 that matter most. Some of these you're going to be very familiar with. Nero, we're very familiar with him. He was brutal to Christians. He killed probably 500. And he wanted to expand his palace, and so he burns a section of the city where thousands of peasants die, and he has to figure a scapegoat. He blames it on the Christ followers, and so the city erupts in persecution, so much so that Tertullian literally says, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. And then what happens is the second emperor that matters is Galerius. He decides he's very brutal to Christians. He's brutal to Christians, but on his deathbed, he's like, hey, listen, By the way, persecution, it doesn't stop Christianity. Call Christians in here and pray for my recovery. Christians came and prayed for his recovery. He eventually would die, but he established what's called the Edict of Toleration. He said it's okay to be a Christian. It's okay. We're not going to kill you. And then, of course, that fateful day of the third emperor that matters to us, Constantine, where he's going against another emperor for all of the Roman Empire. He has more in battle than he is going to have. And so what happens, he's on that bridge of Milvan, and he looks up, and in the sun, he sees next to the sun a cross. And in the sun, he sees a cross. And in Latin, in the cross, it says, by this conquer. And he actually wins the battle. And he converts to Christianity. And by 380 AD, the Christianization of Rome is complete. The Christianization of Rome is complete. After Constantine, every emperor was a Christ follower minus one. But watch this. Watch this. Something happens. Something happens. See, before Constantine and before Galerius and the Edict of Toleration, the definition of what it meant to be a Christian was this. You had to identify and suffer for Christ. That was the definition. No free riders. No free riders. If you were a Christ follower, you were identifying and suffering for Christ. That's what it meant. After Constantine, the definition shifted. It shifted. Now you're a Christian if you're born in the Roman Empire. Now you're a Christian if your parents are Christian. And today, when you walk on that campus you minister at, you realize rather quickly, oh my gosh, we're living in that Constantinian Christianity. Like, that's where we're living. Like, if you go to your campus, 7 out of 10 people on your campus will qualify themselves as Christian. 7 out of 10. You can be like, hey, are you a Christian? They're going to be like, well, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not an atheist. I'm not a Hindu. My parents are Christian. Yes. Literally, almost 68% of all Americans claim to be Christian. For whatever reason, most of the time it's just, I'm not something else, and this is what I know. But when you ask those same Christians, hey, will you get in a Bible study? Will you come to our church? Will you engage in evangelism? Rather quickly, you realize that they're like, no, no, no. They're not interested in Christ. For the majority of you, your ministry is trying to get Christians to accept Christ. That's your ministry. You're like, oh my gosh, like all day, I'm trying to help Christians realize they need Christ. Welcome to American Christianity. And you understand it when you study history. And you're like, wow, I understand this. I understand this. So, in Acts chapter 1, it says this. In Acts chapter 1, it says this. All of these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer, together with women and the Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers. Jesus had just ascended to the Father, and we know there's 120 believers in that upper room. There's about 120 believers. Well, fast forward after Peter's message to the Jews, and now you've got, many heard the message, now the number grew to about 5,000. Now, that number might be a little inflated. They didn't do a census and ask around. It was probably a really good guess. Most sociologists would drop it to about 1,000. And so for this morning, I'm going to drop it to about 1,000 just so that we can follow what most sociologists would say. And no, if it was 5,000, actually, what I'm about to tell you is way bigger. Okay, so just for safety's sake, we're going to go with a lower number. But if I know in Acts 1 there was 120 believers, and if I know that in Acts chapter 4 there's about 5,000, or we'll go to 1,000, and if I also know the end game that by about 300 AD there's 60 million people in the Roman Empire, and 300 AD there's 7 million Christians, this is going to help me figure out the growth rate. So what do I have? I've got Acts 1, 120 believers. Acts 4, we'll say 1,000, just for safety. 300 AD, we got 7 million. I mean, what? Let's just Let's check her out. Let's check her out. Okay, 40 AD. 40 AD, just for safety's sake. Again, we know it says 5,000, but just to appease these secular sociologists, we'll go ahead and say 1,000. That means that 0.0017% of the Roman Empire is Christian in 40 AD. 10 years later, 1,400. Okay, 50 years later, 7,000. Okay, that's like Section A at Harry Styles' concert. Okay, this is not anything to write home about, okay? Okay, this is crazy, okay? So 150 AD, 40,000. Okay, now you're Bieber numbers. Okay, now you're at Bieber numbers, all right, 40,000. But look at this, watch this. 200 AD, we're 200 years into Christianity, and we're not even at 1%. What does that mean for you and I? Well, take heart, little flock, because if you leave here and you're like, you go home and you're like, honey, I'm going to start a major world religion. And she's like, what? Why? I don't know. I feel like I just want to. I'm going to name it. I'm going to get a book and I'm going to get some followers. And literally, if 30 years later, you're like, man, I only have like 1,000. Don't be depressed, okay? And don't think it's not working, okay? You have to give it time. Okay, so don't be like, honey, I don't think this is working, because she's going to tell you, well, have you given it time? I've given it 30 years. No. You got to give it 200. Okay, come back in 200 years. Now watch multiplication. 250 AD, we're almost at 2%. 300 AD, oh my gosh. And then watch. In North Africa, Tertullian will literally say, I don't think I know a non-believer. In North Africa, Tertullian will literally say, I don't think I know a non-believer. How in the world did this happen? How in the world did this happen? I mean, it grew against all odds. I mean, think about this. There was no invading army that came in that was Christian that said you have to convert or die. There was no invading army. Also, there was no imposition of laws. They didn't force you to become Christian, okay? There was no imposition of laws. Also, you didn't get enticed. It's not like, oh, if you're a Christian, we'll give you a government job, okay? You can parliament, you know? They didn't even entice you socially. There was no social enticement. Matter of fact, if you wanted to become a Christian, you couldn't even find the worship services. They met in houses, and they weren't telling you where they were meeting. Okay? These were secret meetings. They weren't telling you. And not only that, add to it, if you convert, you could die. Think about this. And after Paul was beheaded in 65 AD by Nero, the next missionary was St. Patrick in the 400s. There was no missionary even taking it outside the Roman Empire for 350 years. But yet, guess what? It kept growing. I mean, how did this thing keep growing? Is this interesting? You guys enjoying this? You guys glad you got up this morning and got through the Chick-fil-A line? I hope you're having fun. It kept growing. So here's what I want to figure out. I want to figure out how in the world did this thing grow? And I want to share with you 7 reasons, okay? I want to share with you 7 reasons. How was it done? How did a tiny and obscure messianic movement from right here, from the edge of the Roman Empire, okay, the capital was here, dislodge paganism and become the dominant faith of civilization? Let me give you seven things that happened. How did it happen? Number 1, we can see that it was fueled by the middle to high class. Christianity was fueled by the middle to high class. Well, wait a second. I thought the 11 disciples were like lowly fishermen, uneducated men. Well, they were, and that's what got it started. But that's not what got the movement rolling. Okay, when God wanted to get the movement rolling, who did he enlist? A lowly fisherman, uneducated? Oh, no, no, no. The most learned of the learned, the top, Gamaliel trained, Hebrew of Hebrews, Paul the Apostle. So Christianity, one of the reasons it grew was because it grew on the backs of middle to high class. Okay, 1 Corinthians 1:26. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standard. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were noble in birth. Well, wow, Mr. Speaker, doesn't this show opposite of what you're proving? That's not the verse I would pick. I would have picked another verse. Well, guess what? 3% of the Roman Empire was noble. Paul says not many of you were noble, which means what? Some of them were. They wrote letters. Paul wrote 13 letters. 10% of the Roman Empire could read. He was writing to who? The educated. And so this thing, why does that matter? Why would it matter? It matters a lot because literally thousands of Christians weren't killed. They were pardoned because of their status or who they knew. That kept the movement going. Paul is in Troas. He's in Turkey. He sees a vision. Okay, the vision says go to Philippi, to Macedonia. So he goes and he says he goes to Philippi, and when he gets to Philippi, we heard one who heard us was a woman who named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what we said. And after she was baptized, her household as well, she urged us, saying, if you've judged me and me faithful, come to my house and stay. The leader of the church of Philippi was a purple-selling female. Why do I say that? Think about this. Do you know purple was the color of nobles? Do you know how you get a purple dye? To dye a robe purple, you had to take 1,000 snail shells and peel them apart and get the dye inside. If you were a seller of purple, it means you were really wealthy. And we see this. She had a house. Come to my house. Purple dye from snail shells was 15 times more valuable than gold. Think about that. Again, why does this matter? It matters a lot. Think about what the high to middle class could get you, how it takes Christianity to the next level, how it raises the bar. In 96 AD, the Roman Empire's cousin, Tacitus, becomes a Christ follower. And again, you see over and over again these stories. So, number one, it was fueled by middle to high class. Number two, another reason that it took off, the conversion of the Jews in the diaspora. What do I mean? Well, the diaspora Jews were Jews who were living outside of Jerusalem, okay? They would live outside of Jerusalem. So it was the Jews in Antioch, the Jews in Galatia, the Jews in Egypt, they were diaspora Jews. They were outside. There was about 7 million Jews all over the Roman Empire. Only about 1 million lived in Jerusalem. And man, when Paul went to a city, you couldn't just open air preach. And so what was Paul's church planting methods, okay? If you wrote a book called Paul's Church Planting Methods, here's what you have. He would go into a city. He would find a synagogue. He would preach in the synagogue. He would convert some Jews. Other Jews would try to stone him. He would leave the synagogue. He would go to the Gentiles. He would convert some Gentiles. He would gather the Jews and the Gentile Christ followers into a community of believers. He would appoint 5 elders. He would leave the city. He would write a letter. Like, that's it. That's his church planting method. All roads led to the synagogues. Early Christianity found the majority of believers from the Jews who converted. They were plentiful in numbers. If Paul had a bumper sticker on the back of his cart, it would say synagogue or bust, like literally, like synagogue or bust. And so here he is, okay? Here he is in Philippi, and Philippi, oh my gosh, Philippi, there's no synagogue. This is throwing everything at Titus. What do we do? I don't know. I've never experienced this. What do you do to your church planting movement when there's no synagogue? This is an uh-oh moment. Well, if there were no synagogues, if you had less than 10 Jews in your city, you had what's called a prayer sukkah or a prayer meeting. So Paul's like, Titus, there's no synagogue. I know, dude. I know. And what do? I don't know. Let's look for a prayer sukkah. Let's look for a prayer meeting. Okay, Paul, I'm back. I found out there's a prayer meeting by the river. By the river, by the river. Let's go to the river. We got to go to the river. Okay, and that's where, keeping with our story, he meets a seller of purple harvesting snails from the river, Lydia. Okay? From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony, a leading city, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, there is no synagogue. Oh, shoot. We have to find a prayer meeting. So we went to a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak. What does this mean? It means the Jewish conversions provided the most amount of converts for early Christianity. Matter of fact, by the end of Acts, listen to what Paul says. By the end of Acts, this is what he says. You see, brothers, how many thousands of Jews have believed. First reason of growth, high to middle class. Second reason of growth, conversion of the Jews. Third reason, two major epidemics. The Roman military would return to battle with the spoils of war. But they also returned with smallpox. And the first epidemic occurs in 165 AD. Cause is smallpox. It lasts 15 years. And a third, or 15 million, in the Roman Empire die. The second major epidemic was in 251 AD, and this was caused by measles. 5,000 people were dying a day because of this. How does this increase Christianity? Well, here's the deal. It turns out that if you feed and hydrate someone at the height of their sickness in smallpox, there's a 90% chance of recovery just to feed and hydrate them. But the pagan, non-believing Romans were so afraid that they fled and would throw them in the streets when they knew they had the disease. Christ followers had hope. So they would go to the other Christ followers who got smallpox, feed and hydrate them. And so the Christians weren't dying and the pagan non-Christians were. The famous physician Galen, how did he survive smallpox? He went to his estate on the waters and lived in isolation for 20 years until it passed. The leading pagan physician. There were no doctors you could go to. Okay, there was no doctors you could go to. Matter of fact, a Christ follower who lived through the second epidemic, Dionysius, says this. He says, at the first onset of the disease, the pagans were pushing the sufferers away, and they fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads even before they were dead, and treated the unburied corpses as dirt, hoping to avert the spread of this fatal disease. But do what they might, you could not escape it. Watch this. Watch this. Even with no evangelism during this time, before the first epidemic, 1 out of every 249 people in the Roman Empire were Christ followers. 1 out of every 249. After the second epidemic, 1 out of every 8. Before the first epidemic, 1 out of every 249 were Christ followers. After the second epidemic, 1 out of every 8. What does this mean for you and I? Well, it tells us this. When we look at COVID and we're like, man, what are you doing? If we do it in isolation, we're freaking out. But if we look at it from history, we're like, God, what are you up to? There are students on your campus who you are ministering to who the only reason they're open to the gospel or reason they're interested in spiritual things is they went through this isolation period and realized their purpose got punted. Okay, we won't know the full ramifications on Christianity for another decade that COVID cost. The pros and the cons. But I'll tell you this, when I look at history, COVID is more than just not being able to eat inside a Chick-fil-A and your prom getting canceled. Okay, like I gotta believe it's more than that. And people looked at it, and pastors, without looking at history, they're looking at it in isolation. And they're scratching their heads. So, Fueled by the middle to high class, conversion of the Jews and the diaspora, two major epidemics. The conversion of women. The conversion of women. The Roman Empire, women were valuable for two things: sex and birthing boys. Okay, that was the value women had. Sex and birthing boys. The hierarchy of the Roman Empire, it went like this. It went nobles, Romans, Jews, dogs, women. Okay, that was the hierarchy of the Roman Empire. Think about that. Of 600 Roman Empire families studied, only 6 had more than one daughter. The others were either aborted or discarded after birth when they found out that they were a girl. Here's a letter written by Hilarion to his pregnant wife as he's on a trip. Know that I'm still in Alexandria, North Africa. I ask and beg you to take good care of our son. As soon as I receive payment, I shall send it up to you. If you deliver our child before I come home, if it's a boy, keep it. If a girl, discard it. Think about that. Think about that. But not only were they discarding girls, huge amounts of women were dying because their husbands forced abortion on them. Okay, it was forced abortion. It was cheaper for you to get an abortion, and if you die, you die. It's cheaper for me to get a new wife than to raise a baby. How did you abort in the Roman Empire? What would the doctors do? In the Roman Empire, here's how you aborted. You drank poison just enough that it didn't kill you, but it killed your baby. Problem is, everybody's different, and tolerance levels are different, and you don't know when the baby's dead. And so a huge amount of both the women and the baby were killed by poison. Okay? What medical instruments did the doctors in the Roman Empire use for abortion? And remember, ladies, this is 400 years before the invention of soap. Soap isn't invented until 816 AD by the barbarians. Think about this. But then you hear the message of Christianity. And you hear Paul the Apostle talk about husbands, love your wife as Christ loves the church. And then you hear you are made in the image of God. And every baby in the womb is put there by God. And so suddenly you've got this huge amount of pagan women who are dying, having less kids and aborting their girls. Meanwhile, you've got this huge amount of Christians who are having larger families and their women are thriving. It's a wonder the whole of Roman Empire wasn't Christian, of just women. I mean, think about this. Think about this. Listen to what one Christian wrote the emperor. This is what one Christian wrote the emperor, Athenorgius. He says this. He says, we say that women who use drugs to bring on an abortion commit murder. And we will have to give an account to God for the abortion. For we regard the very fetus in the womb as created and a created being, and therefore an object of God's care. Those who expose them are chargeable with child murder. He wrote this to the emperor himself. What does that mean? It means, oh my gosh, Christianity is growing even without these incredible, they were evangelizing, but even if they didn't, it's still going to grow. Okay, it's still going to grow. Number 5, targeting cities, targeting key communities, strategic places, and not just villages. I mean, Jesus was from Nazareth, right? Population 1,600. He then moved to Capernaum, population 1,500. 75% of all of his ministry was done in Galilee, population 85,000. 10 years after the crucifixion, all of a sudden, they'd punt those small backwood towns for major cities. Top 5 largest cities in the Roman Empire. Top 5 largest cities in the Roman Empire. Rome, Paul wrote Romans, one of his most theological letters. Why? He wanted it to be his hub as he goes to Spain. Alexandria, North Africa. This is who the book of Mark in our Bible, those 16 chapters, 700 verses, are written to. The people of Alexandria. Ephesus, Paul spends 2 years in Ephesus. He makes it a major hub. He eventually writes Ephesians. Antioch. It is said if you stand on the corner of Antioch for 2 weeks, you can meet anyone in the Roman Empire because everyone's coming through that trade town. It was the New York City of the day. And guess what? Every missionary journey was supported and prayed for by the church at Antioch. After every mission journey, guess where Paul went? Back to Antioch. It was his hub to reach Turkey. Corinth, Paul wrote 4 letters here, lived here a year and a half. Think about this. One of the richest cities in the Roman Empire. It had 2 ports. How would this speed Christianity? Oh my gosh, trade, commerce, wealth, communication, networks, connection. Find the strategic places to minister. And I think we've done that. Number 6, the sacrifice of the martyrs. The sacrifice of the martyrs. Many non-believers would see how these Christ followers were killed, and many turned to Christ. Nero, what he would do to you is he would dip you in tar up to your neck. He would stick a pole up your rectum, and then he would light you on fire, and you would be the light for his courtyard at night. 12 guards came to Christ as they saw Christians tarred and lit on fire. They would take him to the Colosseum, and they would release the bulls. The earliest biography we have of 2 women who were killed is Perpetua and Felicity. They started writing their story after they were killed. Someone finished it. You can now get it and read it. And the story goes where they were, one of them had just delivered a baby. They took the baby, stripped both of them naked, threw them into the Colosseum among the thousands of people. A few people realized there's milk coming from Felicity's breast because she had just had a baby and her body was wanting to feed. And they released the bulls and mowed them over. And hundreds came to Christ in that Colosseum that day, just watching these women suffer for the faith. Think about that. Think about that. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. Tragedy fuels the growth of the gospel. And then finally, exclusive commitments is what Christianity offered. Exclusive commitments. If you were a Roman, you could choose from one of the plethora of gods. You could Zeus, Thor, whatever you wanted, okay? Hermes, whatever you wanted. And so if one of them required a sacrifice you weren't willing to give, you could just jump ship and choose another, okay? You could choose another. As you saw in the Roman Empire, they even had gods to an unknown god. So you could just pick whatever. And then Christianity comes along, and they require not excessive pluralism of what the Roman Empire wanted. Christianity says, no, you can't have excessive pluralism anymore. You have to have exclusive commitments. What does that do? It brings camaraderie. It brings community. It brings suffering. It brings cause. It brings purpose. You step on campus. When you step on campus, you're entering into a world of excessive pluralism, right? I mean, I believe Harry Styles in Hollywood. I'm thinking about what my parents believe, what my peers believe, what's politically correct. I'm thinking about my own purpose, what I want to do. I'm looking at my Enneagram. I'm just trying to figure out, man, what do I want to do in life? I'm a 7 with a wing of a 3. Like, I'm just trying, like, man. And you enter this excessive pluralism world. And you offer them exclusive commitment to Christ. And those that respond, you gather them in community and you disciple them. And it creates this power of the gospel that was so prevalent during the first 4 centuries. Think about that. Think about that. So, in conclusion, there wasn't just one thing that led to the triumph of Christianity. Also, fairly quickly, you'll notice miracles is not one of the 7. Miracles is not one of the 7. It didn't hurt that they happened every so often, but it wasn't the foremost cause at all. Christianity didn't grow simply because of miraculous working of God. Although when this did happen, it didn't hurt the movement. It grew from a number of reasons, and when added all up, especially women, it's a wonder that it didn't go faster. It's a wonder it didn't grow faster. Now, if anything I said entices you to be like, I want to learn more. Oh my gosh, where can I learn more? There's a fantastic book called The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, and he goes into way more detail in the first 400 years. Now, Rodney Stark is not available to you. He's 88 years old and lives in a assisted living home in Albuquerque. But good thing for you is, if you enjoyed anything I said, he just goes into crazy detail. It's incredible. I would highly recommend his book, Rise of Christianity. These are the seven. And I hope it shows you the shade we're in was planted by the trees of those before us. I hope it shows you're standing on the shoulders of giants. I hope you're encouraged by the power of the gospel. Okay? Let me just finish with this one quick story. My wife, we had visitors come over, and we normally get a puzzle, okay? We got a Charlie Brown puzzle, and we put it right in the living room, right on the table. And it was a crowd favorite. These 6 older adults find themselves sitting on the floor in the living room, putting together Snoopy. It was this crazy thing. And Heath had his corner, Tabitha had her corner, Hannah had her corner, my wife had her corner, Johnny had his corner, and they're just all talking in a little corner. And then my 5-year-old son, Cruz, comes walking in. And immediately everybody's like, whoa, 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 Cruz. And he comes right up to the puzzle. And he does this. And we realized, oh my gosh, in that moment, everybody's small piece that they were working on was ready to transition. He saw it as an outsider looking in. We couldn't see it. Without history, you're like, oh, I got my corner. God, do something. I think you can do this. Please do it. But when you look at history, and you go, oh my gosh, reaching the present is going to be done by looking to the past. And you go, oh my gosh, this is what God's doing. And suddenly you realize history is his story. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. That was great the first time I heard it this summer. Even better this time, Todd. Thank you so much. We are going to do a XD update. So, Executive Director, I'm going to give you an update on where we're at as a movement, some of the things we've been working on. One thing to note, these are his 2 books. Todd, he wrote 2 books. The first one, The Abrahamic Revolution, and the second is In This Generation. God used 2 things to reignite in me some fire and some fuel this summer. One was going to the LTs. Yes. Awesome. And then the other was these 2 books. So he has some for sale out there. There's a Venmo card. You can Venmo to purchase them. And I would say in both these books, it is rare that I just want to keep going. And I feel like I'm learning new things the whole way through. And that happened in both of these books for me, which was pretty cool. So I encourage you to check those out, give them a read. And then I had one other quick update for all of you board members. As you are sitting in this time, you can go and check. I sent an email yesterday, I believe, or the day before. If you didn't get that, go find it. There is a governance breakout, and we want at least one board member from every church to attend. Ideally, the board member would be a chair, the chair of the board, but they may not be here or may have other things they need to do, so that's okay. But we would love to have at least one from every church, and then also you could bring as many as you want from your board. So that's going to be the governance breakout in the chapel, and I wanted to give you a heads up because we want to make sure everyone gets someone there. So those are my quick housekeeping. All right, for this update, I'm going to try to go a little bit swifter on the front end here, where one is just reviewing who we are as a movement. And as often as I get up here, I'm just going to keep reminding us who we are and what we try to do. We are the Collegiate Church Network, where college students are the church. Our mission is to reach college campuses because the future of the world rests with the next generation. And our vision is to have a gospel-centered church on every campus, which we know is bigger than ourselves. We need to be connected with others in this journey. Our promise is we're never going to give up on the next generation. So colleges are the thing right now. If something happened in the world, we want to pivot, mobilize, go towards that. I don't see colleges going away anytime soon. So we're going to keep leaning into that. The praxis is we proclaim the gospel on missionally rich college campuses. We relationally make disciples and equip leaders to leverage their life for Jesus. And we plant churches on college campuses to reach more college students with the gospel. People who want to partner with us, and this is great for your own MTD world, is passionate followers of Jesus who love the local church and believe in the next generation. Those three concentric circles, we're at the center. If you're passionate about follower of Jesus, love the local church, and believe in the next generation, you can tell anyone, you would probably love what I do. You'd love what our church does. That is who we're about. This church that we're in is actually caught that vision. And wasn't that cool hearing their little story about his own as a pastor here, his story of being impacted through college as a student. Our vision, as we said, having a college church on every campus is bigger than ourselves. Our own part of that, our own slices, we'd love to see this movement grow to 100 plus churches. We're currently at 23 churches. We'd love to see over 100 churches. We said we were going to take that 5 years at a time. So in 2020, we asked all the churches, how many are you believing God to see planted out of your church in the next 5 years? So 2020 through 2025, we added those all up, and we said that's the pacing at which we're going to try to go. So we're going to come alongside you as churches, try to support the effort to plant those churches. In this 5 years, pandemic happened. A little crazy. Let's tweak some things. So there's two sides to this visionary goal. One is the church planning, and the other is more on our own church health. So we have church planning and church development. The church development is we'd love to see churches grow to 100 to 200 in attendance. That's just something that historically we've seen in our movement actually brings a lot of stability and health. And so that's something that we're pushing towards. I would say, I don't know for sure, but I would guess right now, probably half or more are actually not in that window. We've got some smaller churches. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you need to try to go out there and market like crazy. We want organic growth. We want healthy, sustainable growth. But these are aspirational goals that we're shooting towards. In the 5-year window that we're in, we had originally said, as we asked the churches, they said 11 to 14 churches in this 5-year window. We have planted 3, Athens, Buffalo, Youngstown State, and those are the churches that sent them out, BG, Wright, Cincinnati, and Kent. We now, as we've gone through the pandemic, there's been tons of transition, tons of changes. We've looked at that, checked with all the churches, and it looks like we may only be planning 2 to 3 more in this next 5-year window. So that's a pretty drastic change, but that's good because we know where we're at, what we're working on, what we're trying to do. It does say Michigan was thinking number 4, potentially. There's a question mark there. We're not sure. At this point, it feels crazy, but we're leaning and believing God and trying to lean towards that. One thing that I loved about Todd coming and speaking about the first 300 years is that it was super helpful for me this summer to go, you know what? We need to be strategic. We need to plan. I think there's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote that says, if we want to actually reach this world, we need to be as organized as any other secular endeavor out there. That's my own version. It won't say it like that. But essentially, we need to get organized. So I love strategy. I love getting organized, planning. But at the same time, the thing that God hit me with this summer is do that and trust that I'm at work anyway. Did that come through his message right there? Like, whatever strategy there was, God was still growing his church. He's still going to do it. And so we can still believe that even though we may not be pushing at as fast a pace right now, that's okay. We need to work and get healthy. So where are our churches at? This is kind of the next thing is we're navigating some significant organizational changes. That was just a phrase I put together. I said over half our churches are doing this right now. And what does that mean? Some just planted or sent. Isn't not ready to plant another church just yet. Like you're trying to get planted and established, or you're trying to solidify after sending out and fill a bunch of gaps. Or stability after transitions of people going off staff or boards or different things. There's been succession planning and even clarity and direction for the future. Just huge changes that are intense staff-wise, leadership-wise, to do these things well. And that is the right work for all of these churches in this place. And so our pace may be a little bit slower in terms of going, but you got to get strong before you can send again. So this is where we're at. 2022, these are the priorities we put in place. A church plant playbook was one of the things that we wanted to do. We did that. We put it together. We shared it with the conference, at the leaders conference, to all the upper level leaders in the movement. And it is in the vault. So if you wanted to go to the vault, if you go to our conference website, on the right side somewhere it says Vault. You can click on that, and you can find the church plant playbook in there. Read all through it. That adopted a lot of the journey language that we have utilized with spiritual formation and missional behavior surveys and some of those things. So we've got that part built out. The next project we're working on in terms of church planning is refining the coaching realm of what do our coaches do, how do we select them, how are they trained, and what do we want them to do forward. So excited about this. 1 second, I just lost my window. And I don't know where I went. There we go. The second one, spiritual formation, missional behavior survey. So this is where when we look at the church development, we have 2 surveys that we use in the churches. One is the Strengths Finder. We've done that a number of years. That is staff focused, so it's to understand health of the staff and get a little bit of gauge on it. The other one that we do is the spiritual formation, missional behavior. And so that is surveyed by Dr. Ryan Cozy, who is our church development director. He couldn't be with us here today, but he put that together, is evaluated. It's one of the longest ongoing studies in the American church right now. I think it's over 70,000 people have been engaged, and this is a measure not to say what is health of a church from the standpoint of budgets, buildings, butts in the seat. I think that's what people call it. We were like, no, if we want to make disciples, teach them to have spiritual formation in their life, and then go make disciples, how do we measure, are we doing at that? That's what this survey gets at. Super excited to be utilizing this, putting it in motion. A bunch of our churches in the movement have already gone through that. That was one of the goals this year. We're not going to be able to get through all the churches by the end of this year, so we're going to kind of carry over to January and February. But if your church has not gone through that yet, we're going to be trying to get in touch with you. And honestly, just reach out, because Ryan is ready to go. He can put together the survey, tell you how to actually get it out to the whole congregation, whereas the Strengths Finder is for staff. This one is to the congregation. So you want to try to get a good amount of people in your congregation to go through it. And so far in the survey, I talked to Ryan yesterday, and a couple things that we would highlight out of this are, first, we see spiritual formation practices are alive and well in our churches. People are reading their Bible, praying, serving in community. There's evidence in spiritual formation, and it's higher than average. And Ryan has assessed over the years, which he just said, this is a great thing. Like, there's a ton of spiritual formation happening in our churches that he has gauged. That said, there's room for growth around mobilization of small groups. So a room for improvement is the small groups or mission groups engaging lostness. There's a need for us to be intentional and to not lose the missional edge of our small groups. And so that was something to keep in your mind. Second is, when you're thinking about the missional behavior, he said, we have a lot of historical conversion growth in our movement. There's a couple churches that have recent conversion growth, meaning if they say of all these people, they're assessing when did you come to Christ. If they're saying we came in the last 5 years, that's recent. Some may be like, I came years ago through this church. That would be a little more historical. And so while we have a couple churches that have more recent, the average is a little more historical, meaning we are in need of being more intentional and on mission in some of our churches. And honestly, I would just say all of our churches. We have historical, but not as much recent, and we can see the need to be intentional with a life on mission. And there are a number of churches here, I already said that haven't gone through. We'd love to get you all brought through on that, because one of the outflows of this is coming to the Leaders Conference in April. We actually want to engage on these topics a lot more and be able to work a little more workshop. That's a time for churches to step away and work on their church, and we want to be leaning into some of these things. In particular, what he was starting to highlight is, as we think about these things, it elevates the importance of mission, vision, and values, and having a strategy to execute towards the vision and the goals. Because having a plan matters when you're leading people. And so that's something that we are going to try to lean into a little bit more at the conference coming up. So that's spiritual formation, mission behavior. Also, with that, we adapted the spiritual formation, mission behavior survey to fit LT. We thought this would take a couple years. We did it in one. We did it at Estes Park and ADK. You're going to hear more about that tonight, and it is actually really awesome what's happening at leadership training. I'm not going to say anything here, because we actually are going to go in pretty in depth with the leadership training tonight in the session. So super excited about leadership training. All I would say is we need to double down on LT in our movement. The board believes it. It's huge to our churches. If you remember, Chad last year stood up here or stood in the circle and said, how many of you are on staff here because of LT? And it was like over 70% of the room raised their hands. It's a huge catalyst in our movement. Expanding organizational roles. I'm going to go a little bit quick on this. You saw emails. We put out a lot of job posting. This next slide is our best rendition of an org chart right now. So we have a collegiate board director, executive director. When I stepped in, there were only a couple roles beneath the executive director, and that was part of the vision is could we build out a team? Because as we grow as a movement, you need scope of care. You need actually leaders from all over this movement bought in and leading at a high level. That's what's going to keep this thing together, keep it going, and to have specialization. I don't know what that meant. Oh, beautiful. I was like, I don't know what I said. I said, there it is. Awesome. That's fantastic. This next slide will show you which ones that we're currently trying to hire. The green are ones that are new. So these are new. We've been slowly expanding and adding roles as we have finance and things available. The yellow is we need a new media director. We had one. We need to get another. And then the fund development is orange because that's aspirational still. We did have Kevin Rogan for a while, but we are dreaming of a $5 million campaign that would actually go towards investing in LTs, operations, church planning, diversity initiatives, and some other things for our movement. And so that's something that we're aspirationally thinking about, but this is where it's at right now. That is a pretty wide gamut. We have a monthly meeting, and we use Traction, which is a execution strategy. All these directors create goals for the year, and then we hold them accountable each trimester towards those goals, and they have been crushing it this year. So if you know any of these people who fill these roles, thank them. And for the others, be praying as we embark in, interviews and the whole process of seeing who God wants for us next. And then this last one is the diversity team proposal. This has been a focus this year. So since we've been in conversations for about 3 years, and a team of people has kind of come out of that we have been working together for pretty much the last 18 months, almost every week. People giving of their time, wanting to believe and lean into this. And when we talk about diversity, one quick thing on this is we want diversity in our movement, but it's not, the focus of this is not to grow diversity in our movement. There's 2 goals that are going to affect all of us out of this that we identified. And the third one is we actually want to help come alongside and take care of the diverse staff that we have in our movement. And so one of the languages that we landed on as we talk about other church movements, we've ended up talking to InterVarsity, Campus Crusade, Chi Alpha, talked to high-level leaders in multiple occasions. And language that we landed on when we talk about diversity is BIPOC. It's Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And that's a term that's used out there. So when we say diversity, yeah, someone gave a shout out. This is what we're defining as when we talk about diversity. And so this team, I just want to welcome them up to the stage here. You can see, I think it's 2 slides away. Yep, that one's Blake. That's not helpful. Hillary Campbell, Alfonso Mack, Vivek, and Lisa. You guys can come on up. We have 3 stools. Vivek cannot be with us. He recently expanded his family and had a couple other things. But this team has been phenomenal. Super brilliant, super awesome in engaging in all this. And I'm going to walk through. We have a handout coming to you right now, hopefully. And there's the 3 goals that we put in front of the board. Oh, my word. Are we supposed to end at 10:15? That can't be right. 10:30? All right, I need to be fast. We want a biblical foundation that can be articulated regarding the value of all nations and all people. Interestingly enough, even Todd's stuff this summer, his content impacted this sheet. I'm going to walk through this really quickly. You can spend more time on your own. It's fantastic. We've engaged other leaders outside of our movement asking if they had something like this. They said no. We stole everything we could from them. We put this together through lots of conversation. We've had other leaders who have done a lot of work with BIPOC staff and diversity in their churches and wanting to engage. And they've said, can we take this and use it with our churches? So super excited about this. We're going to cover that. And then the second one, we want to have a humble cross-cultural understanding and engagement. This was something that as we talked to InterVarsity, we were talking to one of their high-level leaders over their campuses in America. And his name is Jason Thomas, and he has Asian descent. And he said, even amongst myself, he goes, I'm South Asian. I don't really understand East Asian. I have to learn how to engage cross-culturally. And he said that's so important in our understanding because it removes barriers of the gospel. It allows us to understand others. If you think of the incarnation, that's removing barriers. It's solidarity. He came to be with us, and we can understand. The whole world can relate with Jesus because he was one of us. And so this is a huge thing that as we engage with cross-cultural understanding and engagement, that's for all of us. We want to come alongside. There'll be a few, that's mostly going to start with probably an assessment or something to like understand how do we see it, how do we learn? Because we'd love to eventually, in that org chart, have a diversity director who's going to help kind of carry some of this stuff forward and champion it. And then the last one, the goal that we put in front that we're all behind is we want to see the BIPOC thriving in careers within Collegiate and Collegiate churches. And the first two definitely affect all of us. We carry that, run with that. The last one, it is specific to BIPOC staff. And what's interesting is we have a diversity fund in our movement. You can go to Reliant and type in diversity fund. You'll find it. You could actually contribute towards it. I would encourage you to pray and think about it. It was started actually from Detroit, New Life Detroit. When they closed, they advanced money to us and said, we want to champion diversity within Collegiate and keep it going. It was a huge passion of theirs. And so we have a fund, and the question for us as a board was like, what do we do with these funds? We don't think it's right for us just to make decisions. So this is where these conversations started. And as we went through that, the team has identified a strategy that comes from InterVarsity, which is called the Daniel Project. And it's a project just to come alongside and help BIPOC staff thrive in their career and grow as leaders and have longevity in the movement. What was really cool is the guy I mentioned, Jason Thomas, he ended up sharing, after 3 conversations, he's like, yeah, actually, that's why I'm here. I went through a Daniel Project years ago. And now he's leading in the high level of the movement. And so we want to see that happen here. So real quick before I hand this off, because I just want them to have time to share a little bit how they want in their journey, is the biblical foundation. If you're looking at that sheet, we are created to fill the creation and spreading of all people. So that goes through Genesis, and it runs you right up to the scattering of all people at the Tower of Babel. And when you scatter the people out, and God's mission is to save the world, like, where do you go from there? You just diversified language. You made it way harder for yourself. And that's where you turn the page and you get the promise to Abraham. He calls out a people. He's going to make a people and a nation, and he's going to give them a promise. And it goes from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And then it becomes a kingdom of priests is how he talks about them. And even the temple was designed to be a light to the world. You can go read these passages. It's always talking about blessing the entire world, all nations and all people groups, all tongues. And then called to reconcile. So Jesus came and reconciled humanity. And then he gave us that ministry of reconciliation himself, even leading to revelations where around the throne are people from every tribe, tongue, and nation worshiping God. And then as he left, he gave us the commission. He commissioned us to go in John, in Luke, in Mark, in Matthew, in Acts, and in Revelation, saying anyone can come and drink freely. And so when we look at this and go, does God have a heart for the nations and all people, all tongues? Yes, he does. And we want to grow in cross-cultural understanding, which is only going to make us more effective in our campuses where we do have cross-cultural. The international, the worlds are coming to our campuses. You know this. And I think we can grow in how we even engage those. And then beyond that, the BIPOC staff that we have, we want them to thrive for longevity in careers here. And so to share more, I'm going to hand it off to these 3.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay, for introducing the diversity team. Hi, everybody. I'm Alfonso. One thing I do want to say before I kind of just share kind of what the hope is I'm very thankful for this opportunity to be up here. This is something that when I first came on staff in 2018 at my first collegiate conference, I was having a conversation with Brian Wiles here and then on the way back home. And I said to him, like, what would it look like if there was a team of people that were to gather together that kind of help our movement just focus a little bit more on diversity and reaching people in the nations who are just different. And we just had a long conversation about that. And then here we are, like God has literally provided and has done some amazing things. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you that we are even here, and really just praising God that this is where He's leading us. And I think a huge part of that is just being focused on what we see throughout the Scriptures. God's love for humanity was not just for the Jewish people when you look at it at the beginning, but that was extended into the Gentiles, which made the ministry of Paul and Peter and all the apostles just so amazing. Is because they weren't just there just to reach the Jewish people who had already heard about God. It was those who were different, who were on the outside, who were not a part of that group. And I think this is a part of the heart of the Father that He is leading us towards, is to be able to, like, how do we just reach people who are different than us? The gospel is the call for salvation for all people. No matter where they come from, tribe, tongue, language, skin complexion, doesn't really matter. And so the hope in all of this is that would just be a part of us is longing to bring the gospel to the nations and people. And so I just want to just kind of just share that, and that's just the hope in all of this. And I'm just here just really just way too excited just because this is something that I've been praying about and God has provided. So I just want to share that.
Hi, my name is Lisa Wilkowski, and I'm at Illinois State University via Rollbirds, via a few decades at the University of Illinois. And this has been exactly as Alfonso said, a real answer to prayer for me. I first came on staff at Collegiate in 1991. There's a few of us here with that. This has been a real prayer of being able to see us grow individually and as a movement in this area. I think for me, a lot of my foundation is I consider myself a Christian mutt. And what I mean by that is my dad's parents were Catholic, and I was baptized Catholic as an infant. My mom became a Christian a few years before she shared the gospel with me through Pentecostal YWAM staff, and she has spoken tongues my whole life. She shared the gospel with me using a Campus Crusade track for kids and everything, and that's how I became a Christian when I was 5. I started going to a Lutheran church from pre-kindergarten to 2nd grade, and then went to a Catholic school from 3rd through 5th grade. And then when I was in 8th grade, we started going to an Assembly of God church. So I'm kind of run the gamut on our the denominations, a lot of our denominations. And one of the things that I learned through that is that we are better together, and that in our diversity, not just in our ethnicities, but actually in our beliefs also, that it's through that we see the fullness of the kingdom of God. And it is my heart that we can grow in this. And one of the big ways that we can do this is by learning how to see differently, how to see through other people, how they interact, what they think, leaning in when we go, how the heck did you come to that conclusion? And instead of pulling back, so much of what Christine shared last night had me bawling. I just feel like, can we just replay what she said and stuff? I may be wrong. Can you tell me more? And in that, I think the beauty that we have, the opportunity that we have, is to really grow together. Christine, would you share my phone there we go. Ephesians 4:3, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. And the reality is, even as we talk about reaching the world, Christ tells us in John 13:35, it's your love for one another that will prove to the world that you are my disciples. How do y'all feel like we're doing on loving, honoring, respecting our brothers and sisters in Christ, in our diversity, as Trump supporters, as pro-choice people? whoever you are, we're bound together as brothers and sisters in Christ by Christ's sacrifice on the cross. And can we engage with each other on that level? Can we open our hands to each other to learn from each other, to give up and not lean on our own understanding? And I think that's the heart of what is necessary for what we want in diversity, to be able to be those people who really are from all tribes and tongues and nations. So that's what motivates me. That's what excites me. That's why I'm so thankful to have had this opportunity to work with these people and to try to help us move forward as both individuals and as a network.
Yeah, so well, I wish I could introduce myself, but Stephen has done that for me. But I'm Hillary Campbell. I'm married to Stephen. But yeah, so I'm really excited, as Jay was kind of asking us, to share just what our heart is, what we're excited about, to see BIPOC staff thriving in careers, our third kind of point there. I think our heart is to see, like, I don't know, just staff being an exciting option for BIPOC. I think we recognize there's a lot of challenges that come with coming on staff as a person of color, from support raising to, for a lot of us, we might be the only person of color, the only BIPOC staff in our team, or one of very few, which can be just a lonely experience. And so our heart is to see, like, well, we want to make it possible for, staff to be an exciting option for you to thrive in a career as long as you would want to have in Collegiate. And for BIPOC staff to just be cared for better than they ever have been before, to be seen, and just for there to be opportunity to connect with other BIPOC staff and learn from one another, and just be propelled into higher levels of leadership, that sort of thing. And then as far as like our team and the journey we've been on, one thing I feel really excited about is that we've had a lot of conflict. And we've just really worked through team dynamics and been able to stop and say, like, you know what, we're going to go ahead and miss that proposal deadline to the board, because I think what we need is to stop and just get to know each other better, and learn to work better as a team. And I've been super excited about that, and just feel like, I'm excited about the idea of this, like, our diversity team being a really healthy team that lasts for years to come, and hopefully gets to serve our BIPOC staff for many, many years, and everyone else too. So we're thankful for Jay's leadership in that. Yes, those are the things that are my heart. Now I'm going to make a hard transition to talking about something exciting we're doing at this conference. So like Jay said, we have a ton of stuff coming up. We're working through those 3 goals, but one of the things, like I said, we're really excited about is happening tomorrow. So we are hosting, our team is hosting a lunch for our BIPOC staff tomorrow. So that'll be in the chapel, which I think is actually just a room that way. Chapel. So we're hosting a lunch in the chapel. Again, this is just for our BIPOC staff and prospective staff. So if you're prospective, you're not on staff yet, but you are BIPOC, you are more than welcome to come to that. We know that a lot of our staff who are not BIPOC, not people of color, that you might be really excited about these topics and really passionate about them, but we are wanting that lunch to be just for our BIPOC staff, and there will be plenty of opportunities at later times for more people to be involved in the things that we're doing. So we just ask that you would respect that time and leave it for just the BIPOC staff. So during that time, we're going to have a catered lunch, which is going to be really good, I hope. I've never had the place, but they're going to come and serve us and everything. It's going to be great. And then we're going to get to share more in depth about kind of our goals, some more of like our plans for these 3 points, as well as just creating a space to engage with one another, connect, and then we really want to receive feedback from you guys about your experiences. So there will be a little bit of opportunity for that as well at the lunch. The last thing I'll say about that is if you are a BIPOC staff or prospective staff and you are not able to come to that lunch, would you come find me so that I can still gather your information so that we can keep you updated on what we're doing and have opportunity to gain insight from you as well. So find me at some point. I'm elusive, so good luck. But find me and give me your information. And then Alfonso's going to close this out.
Yeah, so in closing, what I want to do is kind of just invite you all to just be praying for us and for our movement. One, be praying that our BIPOC staff would feel loved and seen and served just here, part of our network and in our churches. Also, be praying that we would have wisdom and direction as we continue to develop our team, and even as Jay mentioned, a little bit of like looking for a director for this team in the future. Just be praying that God will provide the right person for us. And then lastly, just be praying for our movement overall, that we would be open and be willing to engage students all across our campuses who are lonely and are looking for hope in Jesus that may look different, who may come from different places, might even be from different religions, that we would all just have a heart just for the nations, and that will keep growing. So with that, I would love to pray for us, and then we'll close this out. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity that we have before us to be focused on this call that you've given us for people who are different. Lord, you are good. When you came to bring salvation to the world, you weren't just looking at a small group of people, but you extended that to all people. And so thank you that the gospel is open to every last one of us, and that you saved every last person in here, Jew, Gentile, all of those things, God. And so I just pray for just wisdom and direction, and that you would just lead us, and that we would just worship you in the way that we love others, in the way that we seek and even just pursue our campuses. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Thank you all so much. It's a privilege to see and to hear from you all, and I know how much work has been going on behind. I don't know, but I know that there has been a ton of work going on behind the scenes for that, so thank you for how you've worked toward that end to bless us all and many in our movement. So a couple announcements for you guys. We've got breakout sessions coming up next, 10:45 to 11:45, so it's about 10:30 right now. So you have about 15 minutes to figure out on the map and how to get to the place that you want to go to, but you should also figure out on the website which breakouts you want to go to. So take a look at that, take a gander, divide up in your leadership team, whatever you need. You can walk up here and check out this map behind us soon. You'll be able to see that. So we got breakout sessions next.
And then lunch today is going to be provided for everybody, also can be referenced on the map. So you'll see there's general lunch, and then I want to highlight there will be specific lunches for LT and church planting if you are interested in attending either of those.
Yeah, to clarify, the LT lunch, you should know if you are to go to that already. So you should already know that. If you're invited to LT lunch, go to that then. Got to go to the gym first, get your food. So after breakouts, would recommend if you're going to LT lunch or church planting lunch, which I believe we all got an email about that as well if you are interested, go get your food right away. Like, go first. And if you're not going to one of those, maybe like hang back a couple minutes, let those people go through, get the food so they can get to their meetings right away on that. Want to let you know, announcement from Leon Springs. Please drive slower through the parking lot. We will have our Mother's Day Out program here today with kids around. So drive slower, and if you didn't park in the back, or if you don't know where the back is, ask a friend. They'll be able to point that out to you and ask you to move your car to the back. Lastly, we'll be back here at 1:30 to continue with another session after lunch. Thank you all. Enjoy your breakouts.
Have a good time out there.
Waiting for the way to wake me up from waiting. Do I mean it when I'm praying just to pray to see you move the mountain somehow? I don't